David. David.
He's falling in a beautiful swirling pattern.
David.
Hello, what is up, everyone? I'm David Wells, and you're listening to the David Wells Experiment. So, quick update. I looked at So, recently I posted an episode saying I'm back, and I was like, okay, that's cool. I know I tried to do something earlier where I said, like, hey, I'm back. And it was funny. I went and I listened to that episode, which I think was 7 months ago. I uploaded my first new episode yesterday or the day before yesterday. Anyway, and I was embarrassed to hear myself talking in that episode, and I'm like, this is the same stuff, but I just sound tired and bored. And I'm like, oh gosh. But anyway, I'm glad I did it. And then I got this idea to upload another. I've had the ability to upload videos to Spotify for a while, but I never really did anything with it. But then I remembered I had not an episode. I had a video done where back in 2020, I guess one of my sole creative efforts was I heard a video store was closing down, and it had been a staple of the Austin community. And so I shot them a message on Facebook and saying, hey, I'd love to come document this and do an interview about the history of the place. So I was able to do that. And I'd put it on YouTube like maybe a year or two ago. And then I spent yesterday like looking it up on my computer because for whatever reason I couldn't find the file. And then I find out that I had made the original video, exported it onto an MPEG 2 format, which is what, most DVDs are on. And Spotify didn't support that. So I'm like, okay. So I converted it and I uploaded it. And I gotta say, I kind of like it better on Spotify than I do YouTube. I don't know what it is with YouTube, but like not too long ago, they started to do this thing where whenever I would upload something, they seem to automatically darken it. Like they just make the video footage look darker than it needs to. And yeah, I don't get it. Spotify does not have that problem. So maybe it's because there could be any number of technical reasons, but I don't know. For some reason, Spotify doesn't do it, and maybe it's because they're mostly focusing on audio. But anyway, I was pleased more with how it looked on Spotify than YouTube, and yeah, sent a link to the original owner who I haven't talked with in forever. And hopefully sometime in the near future, because there's a part 2 to this story. Apparently not too long ago, this organization they convinced him to take his library and open up a nonprofit. So there's a video store now with the same library that he had, and it's called We Love Video. And I think they were supposed to have a grand opening this summer, but that got delayed. I mean, it's a huge undertaking. And so I talked with him about possibly doing an interview, a follow-up one for this new endeavor, which would be cool. I haven't been up to Austin, it feels like, in a while. I think I've driven through Austin, but I don't think I've just, properly visited in like forever. So that's interesting. It's funny. I was scrolling. One thing I've noticed about YouTube is I've seen certain creators have polls getting opinions on stuff. And I won't name the channel or the organization, but I saw this one poll that said it kind of irked me, made me upset, and I was like, what it said was, teaching kids self-control is more important than self-esteem. Yes or no? I know some of my listeners might have a certain persuasion and certain others might not. But for me, I'm like, I read it and it's like, I'm like, okay, self-control is important. I don't know that these things are mutually exclusive. And the organization, which I'm not going to mention by name, but all I'll say is, I think I've been pretty clear, and I don't like to say this, like make this podcast all about it, but my kind of political leanings are pretty libertarian, and this organization was a bit more right-leaning, and I have had, disagreements with sort of left-leaning organizations, but this particular organization, I was like, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I've had previous issues with this organization, and it's like, some things I like that they say, some things I don't, and this happened to be it. But it was just one of those things where it's like, I don't think they've got like the right idea of, self-esteem. Like, so obviously, you never want to, I think, so you don't want your kids just doing whatever. They've got to learn to like, not just act on impulse. That's important. But that begs the question, well, why? And it's like, well, it'll cause chaos for other people. I'm like, okay, how does... And it's like, if we're going back to... And it just come... And it's like, if we're going back to... And it just kind of... And it's like, if we're going back to... And it just kind of brings... And it's like, if we're going back to... And it just kind of brings it back to like the self-esteem. People really won't feel good if they're viewed in such a way. And I've seen this same organization talk about people being aimless, not having a path. And it's like, in a way, I feel like it's the whole self-esteem thing, but through a different lens. I have met people who just don't feel good about themselves, and that really hampers their ability to get anything done. Like, they're so afraid of getting in trouble or doing something that'll upset someone that they just, whatever impetus they have to act independently, it's been kind of squashed. Like, perhaps maybe I think far too one way in a direction of self-control versus the other. But it's like, knowing the kind of organization like that I'm dealing with, and by say dealing with, I'm observing something they've posted. It's not like they've come after me or anything. It's just one of those things where kind of a button pressed, because it's like, I feel like some people just they want kids to just be their puppets and do whatever they say. Like, I'll see... I'm going on a bit of a rant, but, it's very interesting that I'll hear groups like this talk about, like, respect your elders, which I believe in. People who've had experience, gone before you, they've got some insights to say, pick their brains for that. And because that's what I do. I do listen to people who have tread the path before me. But growing up, I felt a lot of people would just use that as like, you have to do whatever I say because I'm older than you. And it's like, really, it's just a power trip. I feel like so many of those people, I have met people who I think are worth respecting. But I think there's so many people who've grown up just being dominated by other people that when they get older and they find out, there's really not that much of a difference between me being older and these kids, like, they feel really self-conscious. So in order to make themselves feel big, they just try to dominate them. It's like they've accomplished so little that they've got to do that. I could probably make a better podcast regarding this subject matter, but much of these podcasts are sort of off-the-cuff things. Now, I have met people, grown-ups in my life. I say this and I'm like 35, but this thing kind of hit home. Like, I have met grown-ups who I know they were worth my respect. And like, they had done things that, I could glean genuine wisdom from. But there were a lot of them who were just tools. I remember in one particular scenario, there was some woman from my church that I was going to at the time, not the one I go to now. But she kept walking in front of me like while I was trying to do something, and it was hindering my progress in said activity. And I asked her, hey, could you please stop doing that? I was respectful, but she acted like I'd flipped her off or something, very belligerent. Anyway, and I didn't respond. I didn't talk back or anything because I was taught, you respect adults. But again, there were some teachers who genuinely I do respect, and they've sort of paved a way for me. And I hope that they know who they are. But anyway, it's just one of those things where it's like, I feel I'm starting to repeat myself. But going back to an earlier point, it's like, I don't think that self-esteem and self-control are mutually exclusive. Obviously, you've got to learn impulse control. You can't just do whatever you want. But at the same time, there's so many people, it seems, who, when you mention the word feeling or how you feel, they'll be like, well, facts don't care about your feelings. And even some of them will say, look, we don't try to just intentionally hurt people's feelings, but when it comes to telling the truth and sparing someone's feelings, we will tell the truth. And if an unfortunate side effect of that is someone's feelings being hurt, then that's something we have to deal with. And I get that. But at the same time, it's like, man, I guess what I'm getting at is like, I have to wonder who messed with them so much where they thought like their feelings were so insignificant. I guess that's why people like Mr. Rogers exist and why they had to exist. Because there were some people going through it so rough that, somebody had to come along and say, oh, your feelings do matter. What you're going through does matter. And it's significant, it's valid. Here's something I never thought I'd say. Growing up, one of the things that really irked me as I would tell a grown-up or something, one grown-up in particular, about stuff that was going on in my life, and said individual would always retort with, well, at least you're not Corrie ten Boom, who's being persecuted by the Nazis for sheltering Jews during World War II. And it's like one of those things where it's like, it always gets turned into a contest of like, obviously what I was going through then wasn't of the same tangible consequence as what she had to endure. But it felt like it was made a thing where, oh, well, it's not as bad as this, so we don't have to contend with it, and it totally invalidates what you're going through. So you don't have a right to feel this way or want it to be addressed. I don't know that that was their intention, but it was just probably not what I needed to hear. But to make it more positive, coming back around, the other day I follow this one Instagram user, and she went through some rough stuff. Because I try to keep this family friendly, I will not say what happened, because I know there's some parents who listen to this who don't want to have that conversation with their kids. Anyway, she's a public figure, and she asked a question in one of her posts, and I kind of commented saying, I'm always hesitant to kind of post when these questions are prompted because, well, I wasn't affected in this way. I feel there were moments, pretty significant moments as a kid, where grown-ups treated me in a way where I knew they shouldn't have. And this chick, she replied with, your experience is valid. And it kind of took me off guard, because if this chick's story had been known by my parents, or, whoops, I guess I let it out of the bag, it was a certain parent, relative, well, I'm trying to save face at this point. Anyway, if this certain individual who had they known about this girl's story, I'm more than certain they would have said something like, well, at least you're not so-and-so going through this. And here it was, this person saying like, it's not a contest, it's not as bad, but it doesn't have to be. Oh, another great example, this person who I can mention, there's that one guy who was born without arms and legs. I think his name is Nick Vujicic or something. Google him and I'm sure you'll get it. But anyway, I saw him speak at a church years ago, and he brought this up as well, that it isn't a contest between, who had it worse and who didn't. Now, obviously, there's a thing of pettiness. Some people can make things a bigger deal than they ought to. Like the person who said, like, man, I go to this place and they always put lettuce on my tacos when I say not to. That's petty. It's kind of a thing where, like, okay, I don't know where the line is, but when I see it, I'll know. But it's this thing of, like, I don't know. Certainly there's a genuine value to, like, at some point learning to endure and working past your feelings or in spite of them. But at the same time, I was listening to another speaker, a pastor. He said something like, there are people who've had it rough and they have a very high threshold for pain. Now, this dude, he's all about, be a man or being manly and, tough it out and stuff. So what he said next was very surprising. This dude who's all about that and roughing it and, all that, he says, but there's some people who have had it so rough that their threshold for tolerating pain is unhealthy. And it was the first time where I had heard, and I think I might have mentioned this before in another podcast, where the ability to endure pain had been seen as a negative, or it had the capacity to be seen as not seen as, but to actually be a negative. That I was like, wow. So I was surprised to learn that sometimes enduring something isn't good. Well, anyway, I wanted to record a podcast again today, so it kind of just devolved into that rant where of me saying, like, feelings matter. I guess I'll end soon, but I don't think self-esteem is a dirty word. Certainly people use it as an excuse of, like, oh, I don't feel well, or I don't feel like doing this. Yeah, that's a problem. But at the same time, like, the other extreme is true. And I guess because I have sort of felt that other extreme of just like, oh, feelings don't matter, it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm always going to pop up and play devil's advocate, even though, like, they probably didn't mean it in that way. But I don't know. This is my podcast, so that's what I'm bringing up. I kind of wish I could say to the person who posted it, well, something what I said earlier. If your kid's got no self-control, no impulse control, they'll just do whatever they want. They'll basically just be an agent of chaos. Nobody's going to want to hang out with them. And it's like, well, why do you care if nobody wants to hang out with them? Because then they won't feel well. And it's like, well, they won't feel well and they won't feel good about themselves. So it's circular, it's connected. Utility matters and ideals, they matter. Short little mini sermon. I think that's what it goes back to when Jesus was tempted in the desert by Satan. Satan tries to go at him two angles and then another one. At first he says, hey, you're hungry. Why don't you just turn these rocks into bread? And then Jesus says, man shall not live on bread alone. And so Satan tried to go at Jesus from a utilitarian, a needs-based bent. And, Jesus had a counterpoint to that the physical, the material, that's not all there is. And that's not all you have to concern yourself with. And then he takes him to the top of the temple and it's like, hey, if you jump, you don't have to worry. The angels, they're going to come and get you. And Jesus said, like, don't test the Lord your God. So Satan tried one extreme, the utilitarian. Then he went to the other extreme, the kind of idealism and all that, to try to get at Jesus. And Jesus had to retort to that. And on that instance, Jesus leaned to the more practical. And then finally, Satan kind of just doesn't try to beat around the bush anymore. And he says, worship, I've got a bunch of cool stuff here. worship me and you can have it. And then Jesus says, get out of here, man. And then he is tended to and the test ends. So I think it's all about balance, There's the utilitarian and the ideals. And when you go too far into one direction, you basically just wind up worshiping Satan. And we've seen, if you look at the history of the 20th century, we've seen the extremity of going utilitarian and idealism, and it doesn't end well. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to stop ranting now. Hopefully you got some edification from this. I'm going to go watch Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny with my mom, because currently it's 2023 and we were going to go see the Flash movie, but I accidentally bought the tickets to indie film, which is what she wanted to see. Well, anyway, as I say in all the episodes, this has been the David Wells Experiment. I am David Wells, and have an absolutely super day. Your feelings matter. Bye. Oh, whoops, I'm still recording.